in when they're kind of popping up. Hi everyone, welcome to the Open Ownership Technology Showcase. This is the third tech showcase that we've run after a couple we did last year. The purpose of today is to basically talk about some really interesting projects that our four speakers are working on, and to share information and learn about the work that they're doing. And we really appreciate them taking the time today to come and to join us. So yeah, looking forward to some really good conversation. For people who aren't aware, I'm Stephen Abbott-Pugh. I'm the Data and Technology Manager from Open Ownership. Open Ownership is a not-for-profit organisation focused on beneficial ownership transparency. We have a team, some of whom are on this call today, of people spread all over the world who are helping countries and registries and organisations to both release and publish beneficial ownership data, but also to use it. So I'm presenting today with my colleague, August De Luca, who is our Data Engagement Manager. So August will be helping later on, and we'll be sharing links on the chat as we go along today. For people who don't know us, if you go to openownership.org, you can find that we have a huge amount of research and briefings all about beneficial ownership transparency, sharing best practices, sharing case studies, talking about some of the emerging work that we're doing. We also run the Open Ownership Register, which pulls in data from 4 different countries and maps them onto our data standard. And we have a team of people, including a couple who are on the call today, who work on the beneficial ownership data standard, which is an open standard for anyone who wants to publish high quality beneficial ownership data. I'm very pleased that today we'll be speaking to Ruben Manukyan, who is from Armenia and who's helped the Armenian beneficial ownership register to use the data standard. So just some really quick explanation about the format for today. We've got 4 speakers, as I said, in the order that you can see in front of you. Each speaker will have about 15 minutes to present their work, and they will be leaving about 10 minutes for questions afterwards. So please, if you've got any questions, either save them and you can put up your hand and we'll call on you after the presentation, or put them in the chat and then we'll either read them out or can call on you to pose your question after the presentation. We're recording this today, and we're going to be sharing it via the Open Ownership YouTube channel for later on. So we'll make sure to send the link out to everyone who's attending in case you want to share it with colleagues or share on to anyone else. So without further ado, I think, have we accepted everyone to join? Yeah. I want to hand over to Friedrich Lindenberg, who's going to be talking to us about Open Sanctions today. So Friedrich he created the Aleph project, which helps investigative journalists securely access and search large amounts of data. He spent 5 years with OCCRP, so the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, as their data team lead, and is now working on Open Sanctions, which is what he's going to talk to us about today. So I'll stop sharing, Friedrich, and then you can I'll hand over to you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Can you all see my screen? Yes. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Stephen. I'm really thankful that I get to present this little piece of what I hope can be civic infrastructure that I'm trying to work on here in this group. I want to maybe go back and take a step back into why we're doing this. So I think the Pandora papers that were released at the beginning of the last month kind of give a good reminder of that. Basically, this fact that the world is haunted by its own offshore economy, which, depending on what the people at Tax Justice Network are smoking that day, they estimate to be between 8 and 10% of the global GDP. So it's a massive amount of money that's lost from public services, from health, from education. A lot of that is tax avoidance and tax optimization, obviously, but some of it is also the proceeds of crime, of corruption, and especially of kleptocracy, right? Where people who are in political power in a country, especially in developing countries, will siphon off vast amounts of resource and use them for personal gain. And the reason I wanted to kind of go back to this overall very big picture is how do we address this using technology, right? I want the discovery or the development of techniques for that, I think, goes back to 2008, when a colleague of mine, Dan O'Higgin, first scraped the Panama Companies Registry. At the time, you could go to the Panama Companies website and search a company name and then find the registered shareholders and directors. What Dan's scrape made possible was to do the inverse, right? To kind of type in the name of a shareholder and then find out what companies they would hold. This worked out particularly well with the lady here, Leila Alieva, who was found to have several fairly large properties in London. She also happens to be the daughter of the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. And so it's kind of showed this flexibility of being able to search the data in a way that's not intended initially to be like a really useful investigative tool. But once you have this, you kind of end up with the problem of who would have thought to put Leila Alieva as a name into that database, right? To search for that specific name. I'm sure that some of the people on this call are intimately familiar with her business dealings, but by and large, it's an unknown name to many investigators. And so you end up with this need to have some sort of systematic tools for finding people of interest in data sets, whether that's something like the Pandora leaks, where you have leaked data, or whether it's beneficial ownership databases that have been released voluntarily by governments. For example, just last year, I helped on a project that did the same thing with the Luxembourg beneficial ownership database called OpenLux, where we tried to find the business dealings of interesting people in the data that the government of Luxembourg had published in its new RBE registry. And so sanctions and persons of interest data can be sort of, I like this metaphor of a contrast agent, right? Of thinking about medical imaging, right? Where you're injecting something that has well-known properties to bring out, to make visible the illicit behavior that's going on in the system. And in many cases, that is PEPS data, that's data about persons that would be in the public interest, right? If you find someone like Leila Alieva in an offshore database, in an email leak, there's usually a public interest in what they've been up to this week. And so thinking about open sanctions, there's multiple components. One of them is kind of sanctions in the most narrow sense. So there's sanctions lists that are published by different governments. I think the most prominent are probably the United States Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, and the European External Action Service, maybe the Swiss, and the British sanctions list released by the Treasury. But there's also adjacent data that I think is really important, and that's a more kind of data about crime. So, for example, Interpol releases a red list of red notices of people who are wanted for particular crimes. Many countries do the same. But one really interesting subsector in there that I'm trying to work on is also debarment. So these are companies that have in one country been removed from public procurement because they've defrauded the government in some form. And these lists are released by many countries, but also by international development banks like the World Bank. And so I think that's also a really interesting source of entities who, if they show up somewhere else, might immediately be cause for some further scrutiny, some further investigation. And then there's this massive whale underneath of politically exposed people, kind of slang for politicians, senior government officials, their families, their associates. And that data poses a massive problem for building kind of an open source list of persons of interest, because the only way that you can really do this in a good and responsible fashion is to go in country, to have people who have this enormous expertise. And that's why I'm excited that we're being joined by ANTAC, who are, I think, the undisputed leaders in that endeavor, who are going to talk about the database they've built. But I think like we can't think persons of interest data without also talking about PEPs, but sanctions, I think, is a feasible subpart of that. So we'll talk a little bit about open sanctions as a technology. So the idea there is just that there's a whole set of sources. At the moment, I think we're pulling in 20 or so different data sources. And those data sources are being ingested every night. They're being formatted into a common data model using something called Follow the Money that we developed at OCCRP. And then there's this kind of big step of deduplication, which I think is where a lot of value is being created in terms of also policy analysis. If you think about these sanctions lists, there's 16 or so at the moment that we have who are on the hate list of the Ukrainian sanctions list, but not of the Kyrgyz sanctions list, etc., etc. And then what we're doing is we're creating these kind of collections or distributions of the data that are kind of united around a semantic focus list, that kind of the big list, all persons of interest that we've collected so far, and then more specific sublists, sanctions, crime, etc. Hopefully by the end of this week, we'll also have a prototype of an API going that people can use to kind of vet sets of data against, or kind of to do this kind of contrasting. And then we also release this kind of cleaned up and coherent sanctions data to our website, where it's kind of published in various formats, CSV and some JSON formats. The reason I find this interesting, and the way that I want to connect it maybe to open ownership beyond the kind of investigative use case, is the idea of data usability that's in there, right? So these data sets that Open Sanctions includes are not closed data sets. They exist on the web, but they exist in a variety of locations, and they exist in very, very different formats, right? So a lot of the work that I'm doing with Open Sanctions is about kind of what I would call data usability, right? So you can see here on the side, for example, just the mere disagreement about what countries exist in the world and what is what country and how to kind of describe them is baffling, right? If you look at any of the kind of ruling elite of Russia today, right? Their country of birth is the Soviet Union, right? So you now need to kind of introduce the Soviet Union as a country again, even though that's not a going affair. The place where this becomes most, or one really fun example that I think is kind of showing how odd this gets is that the US publishes the world's kind of most renowned sanctions list. In it, they publish connections between people and companies. And in about 300 cases or so, they're stating that there's companies that own people. And so either there's kind of a big scheme of modern slavery going on in FARC, or they just have never been told by the people who ingest their data that they're kind of en masse kind of releasing false data that doesn't specify the directionality of the relationships between companies and people correctly. Otherwise, there's a drug dealer somewhere in Colombia who's owned by 4 companies, and I imagine that's a rough lifestyle. The place where this goes the furthest in terms of taking responsibility for the data quality and taking responsibility for kind of making sense of the data is when it gets to deduplication, right? So there's like this whole problem of having all these different data sources, and by and large, they have like a concentric consensus mass, right? Everyone in the world can sort of agree that ISIS is bad. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is around kind of deduping these entities to kind of create linkages between the different sanctions and crime lists that indicate this is actually the same person as here. And this is not work that's kind of fun to do as a data activist, because I also am loath to do it too machine aided, too automatically. I want to kind of get it right every time. And there needs to be an audit trail, and there needs to be kind of a way of undoing it if there's mistakes in it later on. But it is, I hope, adding like good value, because that way you end up with a kind of one coherent list of individuals rather than one list that contains Uday Hussein is my test example, always the son of Saddam Hussein. He's on 8 separate sanctions lists, and I want to get down to one Uday. Yeah, so the other thought I want to throw in here is like, how does this connect to open ownership in a way, right? Because I feel personally that it would be really cool for open ownership to do the same thing and to kind of do more aggressive work in terms of releasing distributions of open ownership data. Because at the moment you have this story going on here, right, where you have data released by different countries in hopefully BODS at some point. But then obviously there's always some kind of interpretation between like what Ukraine thinks BODS is and what Slovakia thinks BODS is, and how they describe the country of Artsakh, if I want to go for a weird candidate, or what's the country code for Kosovo, right? And so you probably either need these people to constantly talk to each other, right, in order to kind of figure out these issues, or you do need a kind of cleaning pipeline at some point to really come and make it come together and make it so that basically I, as a journalist, can just go, okay, and I want to download the open ownership dump right now. I think there's been attempts at this, but I think it should be like really prominent in it. Yeah, I think that would really close that gap of adoption in terms of getting away from the story where like adopting a data standard. And I'm speaking a little bit out of trauma with the procurement data world here, where like adopting the data means going to 35 different websites, getting data that's vaguely coherent, but doesn't really do the same thing. And then cleaning it up yourself, even though that was meant to be done already. And maybe even going a step further, what kind of working on open sanctions has made me wonder is like, shouldn't there be kind of a marketplace or a product that we as a community of people who work on open data and accountability think about, right? Whether it's all these different initiatives that are producing data that can be used in terms of accountability, whether it's in financial services, whether it's in journalism, activism, campaigning, et cetera, whether there wouldn't be value of kind of joining forces to some extent and making that material usable in a more coherent, congruent way. I've drawn up this diagram here. There's a few that are just made up. I think at some point we're going to have this discussion going for land ownership, right? And similarly, I'm still waiting for the extractives industry to really make a coherent, this is all the owners of this project in this country, and they have these concessions kind of database, and they owe us that. But that was just a little expedition. I would love to see people kind of play with the open sanctions data set to give feedback on it. We've also just yesterday set up a Slack group for chatting about the project. So opensanctions.org/contact has the link to that. And of course, I'm very keen for people to contribute their own data sources if they can think of a sanctions list that we haven't considered yet, or a persons of interest database that should go in there. That's it from my end, I think.
Great, thank you so much, Friedrich. Has anyone got any questions? If you've got questions, please, if you go to the reaction button, then you can raise your hand if you want to say the question. If not, you can just post it in chat, and maybe either myself or Argus, my colleague, will read it out. Friedrich, just a question for me to start off with. What's new in crime data? What's are the people who you're getting the source data from, are they changing how they're publishing? Are they improving how they're publishing, or is it still that you're having to do all the hard work?
I mean, with crime data, there's like this disbarment sector, and that's really interesting because there's like all these international banks, and they supposedly have an agreement to disbar organizations that have messed up with one of the others, right? So if you defraud the World Bank, you're not supposed to get money from EBRD. And I'm really curious to see if that actually works in practice. So that's kind of fun. Otherwise, like I'm a little bit scared by starting to go into every single country and trying to find the debarment list for procurement. But I think it will actually like be a super cool tool in terms of doing investigations.
Okay. Great. There's a couple of comments. So Gavin, who's one of our speakers later on, is saying talking about a novel that he wrote where he came up with something called the shit list, so that individuals can refuse service to people on a sanctions list, like Open Sanctions. Okay, thanks for that, Gavin.
I initially pitched this under the title "It's like Facebook but for terrorists," which the German government that's given me a grant to develop this disagreed with and has asked me to remove. That's also for the next question in the chat. I've got runway until March to kind of get this going, and I'm hoping to build a small kind of sponsorship base by then that will allow me to kind of do the continued maintenance of the toolkit.
Great, thank you. I'll hand over to Katie if you want to unmute yourself. Ask away.
I think you're muted.
Katie, I can't hear you. It looks like you're unmuted, but can't hear you. What's happened there? Friedrich, do you want to stop sharing your presentation? Sure. Okay, let's just see. Okay, did you want to try again? If not, we can go over to Ruben and maybe come back. Sorry, Katie's sound's not working. Ruben.
Yeah, thank you, Friedrich, for very interesting introduction. I didn't hear about open sanctions. It was very interesting. I just want to ask you about this OFAC and other sanction lists. We have this money laundering system with their installing in central banks of Armenia and in Middle Asia. And we are dealing with this OFAC EU and UN lists. Have you ever tried to combine them, because we are dealing with these lists every time, and we have this Ali, Mahmoud, and friends every time they're importing, we're trying to organize them, we're trying to match them. We have these matching algorithms, which are, I don't know if they're working fine or not. We have these 5 or 6 algorithms that are working separately on each list. There's this Levenstein and Soundix and every other algorithm that is used for fuzzy matching the strings, and trying to figure out if this Ali Mahmoud is the same that Hamoud Ali or whatever. Have you ever tried to work? Do you know how can we ease that part, or do we have this combined list that we can use in that kind of systems?
Yeah, you can get the combined list off the website right now. It's not perfectly deduplicated yet, but it's getting better every night if I watch a movie. Then yeah, the matching question, that's really interesting, right? Like how do you match this? Because I think also in the financial services industry, there's probably an incentive to kind of keep the false positives low as can be. So you need to be really sure. I think one critical thing that we're gonna need to do is kind of multi-property matching, right? So matching on name, birthday, nationalities, and then yeah, actually, like this is my first time working on a government subsidy, so I'm gone a bit astray and have started implementing my own search index, and trying to kind of come up with really good answers to that. Please join our Slack if you want, and we can figure out the details.
Yep, thank you.
So I know that Katie's rejoined us. Katie, did you want to try and ask your question again? We still can't hear you, Katie, if you're trying to say something. Sorry, do you want to write a question in the chat and then I can ask it? If anyone else has any other questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand, and hopefully we can get the question from Katie, and then we'll move on to Ruben, who's our next speaker.
Hey, Stephen, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
I'm very
Katie,
sorry.
go for it.
Friedrich, that was really, really interesting. Thank you. And I noticed that we already had a +1 in the chat for sort of data cleaning and providing sort of easier access to better quality BO data, and that's interesting. That's we've been having conversations about that between open data services and open ownership. But the question that I had was actually on your access to and use of PEPs data, politically exposed people, and what your experience is of obtaining that information, and in what sort of formats you found it from various sources, and whether you've got sort of any insights and thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, right? Like, just to be clear on what the extent of the problem is like you want the, sorry, this is very cliche, but those people are very cliche. You want the mistress of the mining minister, right? And so you can get sort of the top level of people who are in parliament or people who are in cabinet. There's actually an initiative that's being revived right now. It used to be called Every Politician, and it's going to relaunch hopefully under a different name. Kind of trying to upload the members of all legislatures and executive governments into Wikidata, and then making it easy usable that way. The other kind of source for that stuff, I think, is asset declarations, right? When you have public officials having to file their assets, sometimes that includes family members, which in that case, you then have the details on that. And I think kind of the truth is you need people to do it. And so far, right, the way that it's done in industry is that, I don't know, LexisNexis has 50 interns somewhere outside of London in a basement, right? And they're kind of writing this up. I think kind of the much better model for the future is what ANTAC is doing, which is to have people who are anti-corruption campaigners in specific countries building out those data sets as resources, both for themselves and for industry to use as a gold standard.
The nice promo for Antonina's presentation, which is going to be the fourth one we have today. It's very interesting to hear about every politician. I didn't realize that there were people who are trying to pick that work up. So that's very interesting. By the way, Friedrich, so you know, Katie works with me on the beneficial ownership data standard, and there have been other countries who have approached us and asked specifically how to model BO relationships where families are represented, because it's something that is very important in different countries. So thank you so much for that. I can't see any more questions, so we're going to move on to our next speaker. So Ruben Manukyan is the founder and Chief Technology Officer of VXSoft, which has just worked on the new Armenian beneficial ownership register. It's the first register that, well, we're very excited that it uses our data standards, so the beneficial ownership data standard, and also the beneficial ownership visualization system that Open Ownership developed as a prototype last year. So I'm going to hand over to Ruben to talk all about that.
Yep, thank you, Stephen. Let me share screen. Can you see the presentation? Cool.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, let me just short introduce myself and the VXSoft, and then go for the work that we have done. So I'm a co-founder and CTO at VXSoft. I'm Python enthusiast right now, which is defining the course of the VXSoft because I'm the CTO basically. So yeah, so and I'm a programmer by the essence. So e-governance, we're specialized in e-governance, the VXSoft. We have these services that are software development, change management, personal training, and management consulting, which is needed for the e-government system to be advanced, to be adopted, and to be integrated with our society. We're dealing with this G2C, G2B, G2C, G2E, all the areas. We have different softwares I will show you our timeline. And just to be clear about this generation, about the governance, we have figured out that any kind of developing country, I mean, just like us, and maybe there are different countries which are going through these epochs, through these stages, which is like digitizing all the registries separately, maybe a joint or whatever, to avoid the paper usage. And then the second epoch is then we're transferring the data between different agencies and registries via web services or whatever. And the third generation is when you're dealing with interoperability platforms and you're enabling all your government interactions to be ready for giving online services to the citizens. So right now, I think we're in this between mix second and third epochs, because we're right now working on interoperability platforms and eGov solutions. But as I will show you today, we are also dealing with some registers that are not fully electronic or need to be revised or need to be liberated or revised. So this is our products mainly because I want to show you, I will speak about e-registry, which is our electronic registry for legal entities, and beneficial ownership electronic declaration system, which is basically why we're gathered here. So actually, this is our company's timeline, short list of the all systems. But let's go on. We have this test register of legal entities, which happens that we have developed in our early stages. So our legal entity register is registering company, tracking applications. We have online company registration for some kind of companies like LLCs and so on. Also, there were BO declarations there, but before this change, before this new system, there were scanning just a PDF and touching to the company profile. And we are keeping this state register of legal entities the source of the truth, because as I said, the second part is that in interoperability in general, you need to have data sources and data owners defined clearly and not duplicate them, to be able to check, to be able to validate, and so on. So that's why our new system, BO system, is tightly coupled with a state register system. So this one is already our beneficial ownership electronic declaration system. So we have different kind of logins and so on. So let's not stop on that. So actually, if anyone wants to input their declaration, they just need to enter their registration number of the company, which is unique registration number of the company in Armenia, in this field, and we're going to download the data from our state register system. And if it's not there, or if I'm not a director of that system, it's validating and rejecting me, or it's creating my application error, everything is all right. So actually that's helping us to clear our data in state register system as well, because there were some mistakes. There already 20 years of old data. So sometimes it's happening that we have some inconsistencies. So this system as well is helping us to clear the database of our legal entities. Just to go forward, if maybe there will be good, I will show you, if there will be time, I will demonstrate you the forms. But actually, here is the architecture, how we're keeping our forms, their unique identifiers of each form. The form is, our declaration consists from these several sections, and each section has its subforms and its JavaScript and so on. So we are keeping it as an HTML because basically it's a web application, and that was a bit experiment, but I think it succeeded. We have a history of the form. So for example, we after the launch, we have already changed our mining form once again. We gave another revision. So we're keeping all the revision. We can div them. We can see what's the difference. We can show your declaration with the revision that you have entered your declaration to not have some mistakes or inaccuracies. So actually, this is the database layout. We're using PostgreSQL as a database. We were thinking about, I saw that we have a speaker today that I was going to show us how to keep this data in Neo4j database. I'm very fond of these graph databases. I like them very much. But actually, for writing a web application, it's very easy to use RDBMSs, I think, or maybe it's my personal choice. But for keeping the actual data, we're using JSON-B format, which are fully supported in PostgreSQL with indexes and so on. So actually, the data is kept as a JSON-B. I will show you the transformation of application-specific data and between ownership standard. We have also this diagram to ease data entry on our site. Sure, it's not the diagramming tool that you're suggesting. We're using that JavaScript libraries to render for the end users. But we have this tool-based diagram which you can interact and add or just see what kind of hierarchy you have created for your company. Sorry for the Armenia, I mean, I don't have the data in English, so that's why there are sometimes Armenian strings. For the conversation of the two systems, we're using JSON RPC. So actually, our BO database BO system is integrated with state registries bidirectionally, because we're taking the company information from a state register to validate and to ease the data entry on BO side, but also we're showing our declarations on e-register system. That's why we need interaction between two systems, very directional. We're using JSON RPC format, which is very easy to implement, and I think that it's one of the best. So we have this also as our declarations, BO declarations, should be approved by the state registry operators. There is some kind of role that is dealing with these declarations. So also we have this approval and rejection workflow between two systems. So actually these two systems are tightly interacted, and that's helping us to split the roles between declaration collection and between actual workflow of operators. And also this JSON RPC is enabling us to interact with two different systems, because state registry is PHP based, Apache, PHP, and MySQL based technology stack. And our new systems are all written in Python, Nginx, and PostgreSQL as a database. So JSON RPC is helping us to avoid any kind of inconsistencies between them. And also, I would like to introduce our interaction with open ownership and the standard. And so basically, it's a standard. That's, I mean, if there is a standard, you need to use it. For if you can apply that, I mean, that's one of the best things that we have in any industry, and our industry should use that as well. So it's actively maintained. It's JSON based, thanks God. It's not XML based, thanks to us again. We have validation tools. We have amazing documentations. We have introduction by Caddy Armstrong. Thanks for introducing this standard to us. And you guys, thank you for your work and for your effort. So, okay, if I can show you that how we are storing, just a snippet, the part of how we're storing the data in our database and how we're transforming it. And on the left side is open format JSON already. So this transformation is going inside this BO declaration system. Just I have selected three parts. This is person part, the person statement. This one was a company statement, entity statement. This one is person, and this is the actual connections. Okay, so we're keeping it a bit different for us to help us to show the diagrams and so on. Then we're transforming it to the format that is needed to publish the standard JSON. And this is an actual screenshot from your register and website. I will right now demonstrate you that. That's already using the JavaScript library for rendering. We can see the HTML version printed or download as a JSON, which is actually the format that you have created. Okay, also I have these references in my presentation, just for you if you need anything from this. As I see the open ownership website, we have lots of different technical and not very technical articles about our Armenians changes, and so it was I didn't saw that, so it was surprising for me to see that we have this news coverage in your website. But actually, let me just show you this Zangezur thing. Maybe I need to go to Armenia. And this is a state registry website. Let me just find it, and then turn it to English. Where is our Zangezur thing? Okay, I think it's here. So this is our declaration. This is the instances of the declaration. So actually this information is not kept in e-register AM. It's every time it's connecting to the BO system and retrieving the latest information from there. I think that's it. And we have this list. This is the HTML view of the declaration. Actually, it's too long to show you. And this is our diagram. Let me switch to English. I think it okay. So this is our diagram. You can interact it if it's possible to see and so on. And this is the JSON document. Let me see. Okay, so this is it. This is just a standard is requiring from us the statements and so on. Okay, so actually, and this is system. It's a bit. This one is just for our development, I think, but there is lots of sections that need to be, and these forms are created as I showed you, demonstrated you, like we are keeping the definition of the form, and it can be very easily changed and have different revisions, because I think that it's going to be developed into a very big thing. So that's why we have created these admin panels and this flexibility to avoid being dependent on developers each time we need to create another declaration form. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Ruben. That's really, really interesting. I know I've seen a couple of questions. So one is from Antonina, who's asking if it's possible to search in English on the register.
Yes, it's possible, but it's searching in English content. That's why sometimes they're not keeping the translations properly, but actually there is a possibility to search it in English. I think let me.
I remember seeing it before when it kind of warns you to say you can only search for text that is entered in English.
Yeah.
So if the company gives the kind of transliteration of their name, then
yeah, exactly. It's mandatory, but I think, let me just. Oh.
Antonina, do you want to follow up?
Yes, I want to follow up about this English translation because in our register sometimes we have really crazy situation when people translate the word. How do you transliterate the name, and do you have any transliteration system adopted by your legislation, like that you don't have like some few different possibility to transliterate one name of the company?
Yeah, actually, we have this transliteration algorithm in e-register. Actually, I can't remember how it's working and by what standard it's implemented, but it automatically transliterates the company name. Then the owner or the creator or operator of state registry can just check it if it's transliterated correctly or not. And that's it. But actually, we're keeping the Armenian as a primary, and we're doing all the validation only in primary language or in Armenian. So any matches or not, so the only criteria is on Armenian. But we're always transliterating it to English and to Russian.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ruben. I've got a related question. I think Tim Davies raised this in the chat. I was really interested by the diagramming tool that you showed off there. Can I just understand? So if someone enters their information in the form about the company structure, does the diagramming tool draw that for them and then they can edit it, or is it the other way around that they have an option to draw the diagrams and then that gets translated into the structure, the form structure?
Actually, it's from form to diagram, but also there is this plus button that when you're clicking, it's opening the form. And when you're filling and creating another company instance, it's refreshing the diagram. So it's not the fully diagramming tool that you can only do with, because there's a lot of information that you need to enter to create another box. It's not about just creating a box. It's also, there's lots of information. We have created interaction with the diagram to redirect you to the form and then back, and you see your new added company in that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, because we
server-side diagramming tool. So that's why it's actually not interactive in JavaScript. Just we have added this button. What was the diagramming tool name? It's pretty much, it's GraphViz. Yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the standard diagramming tools written in C and having the all kind of ports to Python and so on. So that's why it's very easy.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we've had some conversations at Open Ownership about how complicated the forms are sometimes for the declarations and whether a more visual data input would help people. Just while we're talking, please, any other questions that people have, please put your hand up. You can go onto the reaction button and raise your hand there, or you can post the comment in chat if you'd like, if anyone's got any more questions for Ruben. Okay, Simon Whitehouse, who is one of my colleagues, says, thank you for your presentation, Ruben. Does your registry allow for data to be challenged? Can someone ask for data about them to themselves to be corrected?
So actually, when someone is creating his declaration, is going through the workflow of the acceptance. So it's going to the e-registry, state registry operator, which is, maybe reading, maybe proofing or something like. Think if everything is in place, and then it's get accepted or rejected. If it's rejected, you need to follow the commands that operator asked you to fulfill. And I think that other than that, if the operator said, okay, we're accepting this. So other than that, I think the media should follow, and then they can comment and they can see what's not corrected or what, and create some reports and so on. But BO and state register have only that workflow of operator acceptance.
Okay, thank you. And are there any other checks? You talked about the validation that's done at the start. We know from other countries that there are checks perhaps saying if a individual owns more than 5 companies, perhaps there should be a little bit more scrutiny of that individual. Are there any additional checks like that are happening in the Armenian register?
Oh, actually, I don't possess that kind of information. If there are different checks for how to, interview or how to estimate the declaration, if it's correct, if it's detailed or not.
Sure,
we are
yeah.
doing our validations like, are you a company owner? Are you the director? Are you have access for that company to fill the declaration? So we're validating the BO user with state registry entries.
Absolutely, yeah. I just wanted to check if you knew of any other kind of validation that might be happening on top of that.
Actually,
thank you. Okay, Tim, I saw you raise your hand, but you've put your hat back down. Was there a question, or you?
So yeah, I was just moving somewhere I could come on camera. Absolutely fascinating to see, and great to see all the learning packed into the project. On that validation piece, I was just curious because obviously one of in that graph you showed, you had foreign owners and even potentially foreign companies in the ownership chain. Have you found any ways to kind of validate those in the way that you can validate domestic citizens or companies?
Oh, no, actually, no, I don't think that was in scope of our work. It's very interesting how can we validate international companies or just a person, I mean. But right now we don't have any kind of tools for that, actually. But when I was scrolling through this open ownership website and the open data register, the global register you have, I think that with a few steps, it's possible to even validate if there is that kind of company exists in the world or not. But right now, I think it's done manually by the law enforcement or other organs.
Yeah, the dream is that one day the register will be truly global and you'll be able to do checks like that, but we're not quite there yet. Still got a lot of work to do. Ruben, thank you so much. Oh yeah, Tim just said thanks in the chat.
Yep.
Great. If there's no more questions, thank you so much, Ruben. There is one final question from Favor. She's just asking, how are changes to the information recorded? Can the public see the history of the change, or is it something that's stored solely at the back end?
No, if I just show you that in the website of the state register, they're showing the dates of the declarations. There are just 2 or 3 because we just launched actually, but there will be all the historic data, everything. I mean, not the changes in the declaration when it's in process, yeah, but then operator accepts it, it's published. That's it. That's its instance, and it's not going to be changed. And then the new declaration can be compared with the old one.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got our third speaker. Coming up next is Gavin Chait, who's an open data scientist and the lead consultant from, I want to say, Whythawk. Gavin, am I pronouncing that right?
Whythawk.
Whythawk. Okay, well, it's just the yeah, and Gavin's going to be talking today about how he has taken the data from the Open Ownership Register and put it into the Neo4j into a graph database to make it searchable. So Gavin, over to you.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Okay, so first, a disclaimer. The Information Tribunal of the UK ruled in December 2019 that the data that you're about to see causes terrorism and violent crime. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. So what I've been doing for the last 5 years is, well, since 2016, is building a data set of every single commercial real estate location across the UK and the complete commercial history of each of those sites. And I do that through only open data, a lot of freedom of information requests, and a very large number of data wrangling exercises, which is basically a perpetual task. And after the ruling from the Information Tribunal, I really wasn't sure if I was going to continue. And then 2 months later, we were in the middle of COVID in the first lockdown, and I had senior members of government shouting at me that the cabinet decision had just announced that they were closing down half of London on Monday, and did we have any actual research to tell them that that was okay thing to do? So I spent a lot of last year and this year answering really weird and diverse questions. You know, who is affected in terms of business lockdowns? How are they affected? What can we do about it? What might happen if we shut down all restaurants? What might happen if we shut down offices? People seem to be genuinely surprised that if nobody went into work, retailers didn't have any clients. And that shock is still being felt, which is one of the reasons you sometimes hear politicians shouting at people to go back to the office. And you know, how do we recover, and will things ever be the same? And those are questions that have come up again and again and again. About 6 months ago, I became the beneficiary of one of the grant programs through the London Mayor's Office around developing a data set, a public data set that basically redevelops everything we've got for the general public, so that they can try and figure out how to adapt their businesses and investments to COVID relief. So what Squire is a history in currently 40 million rows. We have line item data on every single location. And this question has come up quite a lot today, is how do you reconstruct your data as it comes in from all of your various data sets, data sources, in the absence of a schema. In our case, there is no agreed schema, so we need to recreate it. And one of the reasons we do this is this type of chart that we've developed recently, which uses HDB scan cluster analysis. So if you look at the faint blue blob is the official boundary of a high street. And that is where the government believes that business activity is based at the high street level. So that is where your retailers are. That is where, you know, everybody wants you to go back and go shopping. What our cluster analysis does, though, is it reveals where the activity really is by looking only at occupied businesses, only businesses that are actually in operation. And so those red blobs are the kind of the indication of where retail activity is taking place. The blue blobs are offices, and the two little kidney shapes in the middle there are empties. They're essentially enough vacancies clustered together to constitute a high street on their own. Now, the question that immediately comes from that is okay, so who is the beneficial owner? Who do we talk to about these places that are vacant? And what you cannot quite see, hopefully, is I then match the beneficial ownership register into the ratepayers data and do that analysis. And then when you're looking at it, you'll suddenly notice, oh, it's only 3 different companies. They own all of these empty sites. And when you go and look those companies up in Companies House, you'll see that they're all in terrible, terrible legal trouble and all of their assets are attached. So that there's, you know, that there's a negotiation that needs to take place here if the local authority wants to bring what is a major part of their high street back into use. Now, this is something that kind of falls out of linking rates data to companies data. It's useful to think of a company as more like a balloon. It's not attached to anything, okay? You can register a company anywhere. You can have your official place of work registered with your accountants, but your active place of work may not appear in the beneficial ownership register. It may not be in any part of the official registry anywhere. And the original question that I was asked was by fraud investigators saying, we believe that the rates data, because this is where their actual activity is, if they're offshore companies that invest in buildings or they own things, then ultimately they pay rates on these things, and we should be able to find where they are if we can match beneficial ownership into rates data. And that's where we started, and that's kind of now something I'm rolling out into the new version of the software, so that it'll be something where you can search for a company and you can find all their holdings. It's something that I discussed quite a lot with open ownership at the beginning when I started to work here, what I call the Betfred problem. Betfred is a company that does bettings in the UK, and they own all of their shops, their retail sites, through basically a messy cloud of weird additional companies, each of which is a special purpose vehicle designed to hold the lease or hold the legal responsibility for one property. So if they've got 200 sites, they've got 200 special purpose vehicles. And then a whole weird network of ownership. And the question was, well, how do I know any of these are actually Betfred? And that became the Betfred problem of natural language processing, to try and track down exactly through the rates data and how it might be structured through the data, and eventually find that it is actually Betfred. And then you can do a Betfred search and you can find everywhere that Betfred has a shop. Other things that I was doing during COVID was stuff like looking at the changes in commuting and what effect that would have on business activity, who wins and who loses. City of London and Westminster, I'm very pleased to report, desperately pleased to report, because they are the ones that accused me of committing terrorism with these data, are really desperately horrible losers in this. It turns out that if you're 99% offices and only have 4,000 people resident in your area, that if everybody decides to stay home, your office market collapses because nobody lives there, and retail collapses and everything goes to pieces. But outer London, the dormitory towns, because of all of these sort of planning permissions, which have allowed people to convert without planning permission any office into a residential apartment, they actually don't have enough offices at the moment. So there's a massive mismatch post-COVID between where people want to be and where people are actually supposed to be working. And then there's work that other people are doing. UCL, for instance, has done some work on energy. We're busy with the COP conference at the moment, so it's a useful little parallel, how beneficial ownership can be used to track company energy use. And again, because of all these beneficial, these special purpose vehicles that companies use, Starbucks, for instance, each Starbucks is in a different company. But when you reconcile it into the beneficial register, you can then track down where all the Starbucks are, and you can actually calculate their energy use. And then you discover that Starbucks energy use is very high in comparison to some semi-industrial site being used as a brew pub. And so if you want to start taxing or changing behaviors of companies, you can't just look at physical size, you need to look at networks of holdings. Okay, so some of this might then give you some context as to why beneficial ownership is useful from a research perspective. And there really are a lot of different use cases that people have wanted to explore. So let's talk about Squire, my software, open ownership, and Neo4j. This is the network of tools that we use to be able to organize the data that we collect. The data sets are really every single type of thing. And Friedrich, back in the day when we were both at OKF, used to have a piece of software that allowed you to explore commercial data. And he had a whole cool drag and drop system that allowed you to sort of bring data in and match it into the structure and then be able to use it. What I use nowadays is Pydantic to define annotations and schemas, so data structures within the system. The database for Neo4j, partly because it's got a full Lucene search engine built into it, so it becomes a really useful way to very quickly search. We do the CRUD operations in Python, and a piece of software, a library I developed called Wicked, which does all of our data transformations. It allows us to manage schema conversion. And the reason that was built is mostly because my other hat is data science teaching and data science research, where data probity is a critical part of what we do. So I work very closely with a lot of researchers, and something that comes up again and again is, can you prove from where we are now with the analytical results back to source, all the data transformations, everything that was done to the data, so that we can prove through duplication and peer review that what we're saying is defendable. And that came up when our data was also used by the government for the levelling up scheme. One of the local authorities sued because they didn't like the vacancy data history that they had. And I demonstrated their going back to source, basically, that this was their source data. And if they didn't like it, that's their problem. So Neo4j is a graph. If you are not familiar with where a graph works, and you're more used to a sort of tabular approach like SQL, which is more like networks of tables like Excel, a graph really is just nodes and edges, where you essentially describe a node, which is just a JSON object, and you link them together, and you can give them weights, and you can give them names, and you can do stuff like that. Essentially, that is the structure of the beneficial ownership registry. So the data comes out as something called a JSON lines file, which is essentially a set of JSON objects. And those JSON objects are the nodes and edges. And it's just a long list of JSON nodes and edges. And you need to kind of pass through that and rebuild your database. The drag and drop system that we developed, which in the next couple of weeks will be going live beta for anyone to use for any sort of data set. But essentially, we import a data set and then you drag and drop the columns into the schema. And the new version is going to be way more sophisticated, allowing you to do a lot more complex data transformations. The idea being that you can start from the world's messiest spreadsheet imaginable and clean it up using nothing but a few lines of human readable text. And then you go from there and you hit a button. And from our perspective, as long as the publisher keeps their schema the same, which is by no means guaranteed, then that process becomes semi-automated over time. And that makes the very small team that we've got that does this quite effective, because we're updating nonstop. So it's millions of rows a month that we're updating. There's 350 local authorities in the UK. So that's 350 different data sources, of whom 275 currently publish, and the others all claim it causes terrorism. We've spoken a lot about the beneficial ownership schema. This is what it looks like. It's nicely written, it's easy to understand, but you are going to have to read it if you want to start using the APIs, if you want to start working with these data. You're going to have to understand the definitions, you're going to have to understand how they interrelate to each other. There's some little quirks, but by and large, it's relatively straightforward. The main thing is to just be comfortable with the terms and to be clear in your processing. After all that, that's basically the code that allows you to do this. So once you've essentially transcribed the beneficial the schema from open ownership into a pedantic model, you can then use those pedantic models. So you open your JSON lines file, you process it line by line, and you essentially import each line into your pedantic schema. You get all your validation for free, and you can then dump that straight into your Neo4j database. The way this works, though, is you've got to remember that the connections between the nodes have to be done manually. Okay, it doesn't automatically happen that because you've put in unique identities that match each node, that Neo4j knows anything at all about that. So you are going to manually process each of those edges and connect your database up. One of the things I also built is a tokenizer. The thing about the names, if you want to be able to just use a classic predictive search, then it helps to have tokenized and created a new field in your database that allows you to do the search on a tokenized field. So that's just something. And I used NLTK, the Python natural language toolkit, to be able to do the tokenizing. It's pretty good at that. It's pretty quick. And then it's just one line of code in the Neo4j to essentially assign an index and a tokenizer, an analyzer, to a particular node identity. And then from there, you can get really, really quick search. And that search, coupled with some of the other things, allows us to do this pattern matching. So we have to go from an address and a ratepayer name in a local authority. We have to match that back in to the addresses and to the company names in the register. And as a few people have mentioned, the false positive problem is huge. Your matching quality is pretty low because at each local authority, it's human beings who seem to not care too much about spelling. So there's no consistency in the way company ratepayers are spelled. And then obviously a lot of those companies are not operating from their registered address. So your address matching doesn't always help you. It's great when you get an address match, but that's rare. So a lot of the time you're doing pure company name matches, and you've got to be really careful about that because that isn't always meaningful. So if you're looking at a particular company that you know is supposed to be of a particular size, but you're getting a one-hit match in the middle of nowhere, then chances are that's a false positive. Okay, so weighing these things up as you do these matching exercises is quite challenging. And obviously what we're trying to do though is pin down these companies so that the kind of floating nebulous company registration data can be placed exactly in a location, and then you can use that. The use cases are fairly broad. We've got people who want to simply put names on maps. They want an open alternative to Google for Google Maps. They want to be able to put names on maps and be able to say, this is a Starbucks and this is a Greg's, and they can basically do that automatically. And that's in the UK in comparison to Ordnance Survey, who charges an enormous amount for similar data. Through to people now doing post-COVID economic recovery and trying to understand at the high speed which businesses are affected, and particularly for big areas of vacancy, big clusters of vacancy, what are the companies that they should be talking to? Who are the actual landlords? And that isn't always clear. Even the local authorities don't know who all their ratepayers are. If they're special purpose vehicles, that they literally have no idea. Through to national government trying to figure out how to navigate the entire economy changing shape in a very, very short period of time, with nothing to go on really. There's no data that anyone has. So that's it. If you have any questions, happy to answer. I did that really fast.
Thank you, Gavin. That was fascinating. No, appreciate you doing it fast as well. So any outstanding court cases that we should know about before we proceed, or? No,
I stopped charting. Essentially, the FOI, basically what the Information Tribunal ruled is that a publisher, a data publisher, doesn't need to prove risk from violent crime when making a claim that they won't publish. So the UK no longer has an FOI Act that is enforceable. So I use the FOI as the only process to request data. It's the formal request process, but it isn't a mechanism anymore to enforce publication. And it's pretty weird is that, I'm being funded by the mayor's office, but they have no influence to enforce the small number of local authorities that refuse publication to publish. So, you've got the main mayor's office going, please, please, please publish. We're trying to help you. And them going, no, we don't care.
Okay. And you said the tool is going to be released to everyone in a couple of weeks.
The first part of it is the data wrangling tool. That's a generic, and that I'll be releasing publicly to anyone who wants to use it in the next couple of weeks. The new searchable, user-friendly version of my data explorer. I mean, if you go to squire.com now, you can use it. You can search for stuff, okay? But it's not particularly user-friendly, and none of the reports were designed for non-researchers. So the new version will go out next year and in the first quarter, and you'll have an opportunity to play around and essentially also search for companies. Some of the cluster analysis will be up there, and you can start to look at it and, similar call to everybody else. Have a look and tell us where the cluster reflects your view of your own high streets if you happen to live in the UK.
A question that's just come in from Ada on the chat is, You can do this because the UK has open data on companies and the cadastre, right? You were talking about the Ordnance Survey data.
There's a major problem with the location data in the UK because no, it isn't an open cadastre. All we get is a postcode centroid, which essentially means that we cannot, using open data, accurately geolocate any business to its actual address. All we can do is shove it in the center of essentially a shape. The shape isn't very big, but when that shape can include, you know, in central London, several hundred businesses within a very small area, it's fairly meaningless in some cases. If you've ever used a GPS system that uses open data and it's put you in the wrong place on the wrong side of an entire block, you're using open data.
There's a consultation. There's a consultation going on right now, isn't there, about the Ordnance? Yeah, yes. Okay, yeah. I saw Angus put his hand up, but has taken down.
Yeah,
Angus.
I can still ask the question. Hi, thanks, Gavin. I was just wondering, so you found some of these empty businesses and they were all stuck in legal quandary. I was wondering if you also found any which were just being owned as a store of value in the same way some residential properties have been kept for that purpose.
There's an enormous variety of, I mean, look, you know, there's short-term vacancy and long-term vacancy. Short-term vacancy is like short-term unemployment. It's just regular churn. Businesses come and go. Structural vacancy is a different problem. In some cases, they can be because of you know, legal stuff. In others, there's all sorts of weird stuff. And unfortunately, you know, I started off doing this because what I'm interested in is economic development. I'm interested in bringing businesses back into use and kind of giving ordinary people the sort of information that you'd normally have to pay an enormous amount of money for. What I didn't expect was to spend so much time fighting with lawyers, which pretty much has become my life. So one example was in Camden. What a lot of people who are using my data like to do is print it out in a spreadsheet and walk around and look at it and see whether it matches reality. And I got one very angry call from an investment banker saying, you know, I've just looked at this new building that's just been renovated and it's like 60% occupied and you're showing it as totally empty. And I said, well, okay, but that's what the local authority says. You know, I mean, shouting at me about the data is, you know, no good. I can't correct it. But I phoned up the local authority and I said, you know, I've looked at this company's, the landlord's website. On their website, they list their tenants. And so I can tell you that this building is 60% occupied that you're reporting as vacant. And they're like, well, we don't care. We're getting our rates. We're being paid. We don't care who's paying it. Okay. And with that, I then basically did a lot of investigation. Also included reaching out to the landlord to say, listen, is there a reason for this? And immediately got a set of lawyers' letters back telling me that I wasn't allowed to ask that question. And what turned out was that this was a dodge. So the landlord was paying the rates, which in the UK is 50% of rent. So the rental valuation is 100 and you're paying 50 in tax. So your total rent is 150. So essentially, the landlord was paying the tax on behalf of their tenants in lieu of a discount on rent. This way, they could continue to try and get people in at full rent without ever telling people that they're actually running discounted rents. So the tenants are getting a 33% discount. The landlord's essentially giving a 50% discount. And this is a normal way of doing business. There are also people who squat on buildings that basically just hold them, and then you'll see them trade. There's quite a few buildings with their own Wikipedia pages where every 5 years it goes up by another order of magnitude as it gets sold, which just, you know, I think the argument is that if you want to launder a few $1 million, buy a restaurant. If you want to launder a few $1 billion, buy a building in central London. And then you just trade these buildings. So yeah, there's a whole range of things in the structural vacancy area, and it's not one thing, but it's frequently dodgy.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you for that. I think we've got Katie's got her hand up as well.
I'm hoping my audio is still working.
Yep.
Yay. Gavin, thank you so much. So I work on the beneficial ownership data standard, and we've been talking recently about the auditability of beneficial ownership data and how the standard supports that. And I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the sort of auditability, as it were, of the data transformation and enhancement process.
Yeah.
And how you've had to do that. I guess my question is, do you have any reflections on how data standards could better provide a solid foundation for that ongoing transformation and the auditability? So we've got the auditability sort of at the end of the publishing of the data, and then you've got the ongoing. And
so in my vernacular, a standard is simply a schema. Okay, I think a schema on its own is just a definition. This is an agreed structure for our data. This is the destination of, and this destination is predictable. And so, I mean, like, I'm the beneficiary of your really hard work of having to standardize data into the beneficial ownership system. But if I ever had a question to you about how do you get from source to there, maybe there wouldn't be a clear answer. And to me, that's a different set of problems. So in our case, what we do is we maintain an exact copy of the original source data. In our case, we do that because a lot of local authorities simply delete regularly data that they supposedly are supposed to keep in public domain. So I was worried about this. So we essentially now keep a copy of it. And the second thing is that the main thing that Wicked does, that I designed it to do, is it produces this JSON method file. So essentially what we store is source data plus the method file plus our working data. And essentially you can hit a button, take your source data, take your method file, hit the button, and it'll generate the output, and it'll compare the output to the data that I'm using and give you a hash and tell you, yes, this is the same. Therefore, your data has probity. And you can then read the method, you can see exactly what was done. And if you disagree with that process, then you can query it and you can maybe change it. And I mean, there are always judgment calls in restructuring data. It's not a one size fits all approach. One of the challenges that we were addressing with this approach is that you have an agreed standard, and it's great that other countries are now starting to actually use it because it saves them time. But in our case, there's no way we're going to get every local authority to agree to one schema. When it came to planning data, the UK government paid local authorities to try and get them to move to a single schema, and they wouldn't do it. So there's nothing I can do as a third party. So what I said is, well, we don't care. As long as I have a published schema, so we have a published schema of our own of what we want rates data to look like. And then as long as we have a method that demonstrates how to transform whatever we get into that, then that's our probity. And it means that we don't need to receive agreement from anybody. We can just do what we need to do and not worry too much about it. The challenge has come in, though, is because this is a different question. That's kind of a third question, which is, okay, so when people actually have a query and come to you and say, we don't believe you or trust your transformation, what is their capacity to actually understand the probity record that you're going to give them? If I give them a method and I say, look, here's a JSON file. It tells you exactly how we transformed it. Here's a piece of software. It's open source. You can scrutinize the code. You run it exactly, okay, on your source data, which is on your website, and you'll see that the data is the same when it comes out the other end, and you can prove to yourself that we're legit. But I mean, I've had this one case now, which is a court case. I sent in the thing. I tell you, just getting that through everybody's head as to what probity meant, I just kept saying the same thing again for days and days and days. So I think disclosure, honesty of that, I think is really great. But I think there's a long learning curve. I mean, people are struggling with schemas. just data standards. Probity is another whole problem.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you for the presentation and for all the answers afterwards. We're going to need to move on to our final presentation now, but really appreciate that. So our final speaker today is Antonina Volkotrub, who's an analyst for ANTAC, which was mentioned earlier on, which is the Anticorruption Action Centre based in Ukraine. They've created and maintained an open database of more than 47,000 politically exposed people, their associates and entities in Ukraine. So Antonina is going to be talking to us about how they did that work and how they continue to work on it. So Antonina, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm really sorry. I'm trying to share my presentation. It's working laptop and I have some difficulties with this.
Oh, okay.
Let's try to do it.
If you want me to, I've got it here,
yes,
so I could.
Stefan,
okay.
if you can share this, yes, please. Hello everyone, and thank you for having me here. Stefan sharing my presentation. Sorry for this technical issue. Before starting, I'm saying that I'm not a really good technical guy. I'm not a magician. I'm still learning in data science. So I understand all these difficulties with registers, but I'm not a coder. In ANTAC, I am a transitor between our analytical team to our IT team, just trying to share all our pains and solving the difficult tasks. And today I will share you our work in PUB database. This are our registers, which was created based on all public data. And firstly, next slide, please. I will start with how it works and what gives us an opportunity to create this PUB database. First of all, after Revolution of Dignity, we had this window of opportunity. And during these 8 months, we decided to try to open as much registers as possible. And therefore, Ukraine became the first country with PO register, beneficial ownership registers for the companies. However, this register is not really good from technical side, but it works, partly works. I will share it more. The second register, which was crucially important for creation PUB database and actually for all public accountability, is as a declaration of public officials. This register was opened in 2016 and working publicly with API from 2016, and you can find declaration for the last 6 years, because even declaration from 2015 was actually submitted to this register. And we talked a lot about today about public procurement in our first presentation. Actually, in Ukraine, we have a really good system with all united databases. With all united data is Prozoro system, which definitely one of the best in the world. And we also use this Prozoro for checking like how beneficial ownership data works, because we have some restriction in public procurement for if companies just try to apply for tenders without BO data. The next slide, please. And one of the biggest our win and possibility to create our register of PUB database is beneficial ownership registers of the companies. And we provided some analysis of these registers, and we were looked for some manipulations, how this registers was violated, how the legislation was try to ignore it, and how companies decided not to submit real information or submit the wrong information. And one of the biggest findings of this report, the next slide, please. We found that oligarchs submitted that they are beneficial owners of the companies in much more lower, much less often than some nominal owners. And this was a key point of creating this PEP database, because as you can see, that beneficial, that oligarchs, some politically exposed persons, don't want to show in registers that they are PEPs and they are controlling of these companies. So as the next slide, we start working with PEP or QA. And here right now we have 40,000 of PEPs and their close associates. From what sources we are going to take the data. And we took this data. You talk a lot about JSONs and CSV, and everything's really good, but sometimes we had to work with PDF files. Or you had to write a request to state official and try to receive information about this, the director of state company or like other PEPs. So in our cases, it also was possible. We, in our PEP database, we also submitted some information, and not only with some basic information about PEP, but also with their companies connected. Therefore, we have only almost 30,000 of companies and CEOs of these companies. I want to say that these companies are not only Ukrainian companies, but also companies from other countries like United Kingdom, Cyprus, Netherlands, and Austria. We, as analysis, open all possibly available open registers and collect the data from the state registers and submit these files to our PEP database. So everyone can just go to a website and upload all these files. And yeah, we use automatic synchronizing with all these key state registers, which are these corporate registers as the declaration registers. Also, we have different registers for joint stock companies. And we have registers of immovable property for land registers and vehicle registers. However, they are not are open in APA format, so it's like semi-hand format of working. It's therefore is like still not perfectly matching. And the next slide, please. And creation this PEP database, we have this text format you can see, which you could see on our websites, and we also provide some visualization format for all data available about our PEPs. For instance, it's one of the ally of Igor Kolomoisky, who is Ukrainian oligarch and has already stolen more than $5 billion from Ukrainian economy. And playing with visualization on our websites, you can build some graphs and open like more links and find some connections with different people. Here you can see some synchronizing with corporate registers with and with information from PEP database. Unfortunately, it's available only in Ukrainian right now because it's beta version and we are still playing with this. But all information is absolutely is current because it just receives data from our registers. And this tool usually is used by journalists or other financial institutes for making some investigations. The next slide, please. And we have one more interesting tool for our PEP database, which is scoring of unexplained wealth risk. This stuff was created on the basis of a declaration, and we just took all of this declaration API data and create some red flags. What can be wrong with this asset declaration of this person, and calculated the possible risk that this assets can be received not legally. And to be honest, for our lawyers, this one is the biggest work, because many PEPs don't like to be named as PEPs, and they want to be deleted from database, but also we need to be very specific and very accurate with all this unexplained risk data, because this scoring is used for by financial institutions. And unfortunately, I couldn't share my window. I just want to show you a little bit this PEP case, or I just, Stefan, if
do you want to try sharing your screen again?
Let me try. I think I haven't changed this possibility in my laptop, and I will be just closed if I do it.
Is there a link you want me to open up on this side? If you put it in the chat, I can open it.
Yes, thank you. It will be faster. Sorry for this. I haven't checked because could you open this link, please? Actually, among all this PEP database, we working with some sanction and new data, which you can see in our PEP database is sanctions. And Dubinsky is our personal victory, because we advocate quite a long time that he was mentioned on an OFAC list. And right now, finally, we can to add this sanction to our PEP database. And here, what you can see, it's all the sanctions mentioned on near the photos, US and Ukrainian, and all this data, what you can see during this list of the PEP is just connected and summarized analytically from asset declaration. So all these are publicly available data, but on more readable format for analysis. And also why I'm was asked about this transliteration, that we work a lot with the spellings of the name, because Ukrainian transliteration, usually people with Ukrainians who try to buy something abroad or some properties and are under sanction, they use Russian transliteration or some old transliteration from their passport. Therefore, we create personal library of transliterations for making this PEP much more visible for other authorities. And actually, this is the key information what we have in PEP database. And if you have any questions, please feel free to share it. I will be happy to answer. Thank you. Stefan, you're muted.
Sorry, classic. I said just thank you so much. That was really interesting as a presentation. I mean,
yes,
you start.
One was sorry for technical issues.
No, they always happen. You started off by talking about the kind of political opening that allowed this work to happen. What do you think the political climate is like in Ukraine at the moment? I mean, is all of your work becoming a lot more difficult?
Right now, it's difficult. However, right now we have some political will to modify our register of beneficial ownership data, and just to make the quality of the data much better, and to solve some problems which were mentioned in the previous legislation, to close these holes. However, it's not so easy like as it was in 2014.
Okay, thank you. I was just posting a message saying, if anyone has any questions, please remember you can do the reaction button and then raise a hand if you want to ask a question, or can post it in the chat. And so the on the website you were just showcasing, there were 15 investigations that were mentioned on there. Is that investigations done by your team, or is it you partner up with local?
No, it's only our team.
Okay.
Usually we took investigations done by our local partners, check and verify all the data. And if we see that this person is beneficial owner of that company and that company is not in our register, we add this company to the registers with all data and documents which process.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Agustina, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks, Antonina, for this excellent presentation. I'm a big fan of the platform. I have a question for you, but then also to Friedrich as well. Have you seen, or are you aware of any like impact or consequence based on your work, or of any of the investigations that you held, or on the direct kind of website that you launched? Are there public authorities using that information to their internal due diligence, or to actually sanction someone, or to, I don't know, something like that, or in external parties as well?
Oh, you see, we even didn't expect that we have so much influence with this PEP database, but right now we have a really funny chat with our former minister who want to be removed from the PEP database, because for him it's quite difficult, like to transfer money without any additional documents, because all banks, even not only in Ukraine, but it was case with the UK bank. They just asked for verification and for adding some additional sources for additional proofs about the money. Also, I showed the case with Dubinsky. Dubinsky became under OFAC sanction list, and it also was a result of PEP.org database, and we a little bit modified and did one more like wiki pages which called Visabam project. I will send the link a little bit later. And also our PEP database is used by all Ukrainian banks, and also such huge companies like Bureau Van Dijk for checking some information and for collecting the data about PEPs. And also our National Bank of Ukraine just promote our PEP database for the usage by financial institutions because of some data and the possibility to check really fast. However, we have some challenges, and the biggest challenge for us is that in Ukraine we don't have publicly available this unique identifier of each person. We have this ID tax number, but it's a private information and it can be published publicly. So for us, it's very difficult to understand that Igor policy is exact Igor policy for which we have in our database. So we need to do some special search and cannot optimize the synchronization among registries fully automatically. So some work should be done manually. And right now we advocating some possibility to have this unique identifier in our beneficial ownership registers, and it can be used for asset declaration like overall, but it must be publicly available.
That chimes with the kind of advice that open ownership tries to give about strong identifiers. So that's good to hear. Hopefully that will progress. Friedrich, did you have anything you want to say to answer Agus's question?
Well, I think kind of the way that we've been using the data has been kind of for lead generation. So I think that's often thrown up like, I don't know, you have a data set and then you run it against PEPs or sanctions and you have 1,000 hits and then you work them down. The very first time we ran a sanctions data set in OCCRP was against the laundromat, and that immediately popped up kind of an arms trading company for the FSB. Right now, what's kind of interesting is for open sanctions, I'm seeing a lot of kind of small fintech-y companies pop up. There's like a vendor from, I don't know, rural America making banking software that's interested in this stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see what other users it might be.
Great, thank you. If there's no more questions, thank you so much, Antonina, for the presentation. It was really, really interesting. And
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's spoken today. I know that we have someone, Lucine from Armenia, who wanted to make some comments that helps to explain the presentation that was happening earlier on. So Lucine, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for the presenters. It was really good, informative event. And of course, I want to prize once again Open Ownership for providing all these beneficial ownership data standards for a list of countries that can move forward in one direction and bring us to the destination that we talked about. Of course, Ruben very nicely presented our declaration. I just wanted to add a couple of changes in Armenian declaration system that we did this summer. And of course, this transliteration issue also exists in Armenia. However, to somehow solve it in short term, we added a requirement to attach to the electronic declaration the scanned IDs and also translated by notaries. So in some risky cases, when electronic declaration is submitted to the e-register, then before approving the register by the register the declaration, the names, the transliterations could be checked if it's available in IDs, and in some cases several problems we hope should be solved. And for Armenian citizens, it is more or less solved because while filling in the electronic declaration, the data about names and ID numbers is automatically checked with Citizens Register. And if something is wrong, that the system automatically stops the person to continue to fill in the declaration until the data is correct. So that's one of the changes. And the other one about the verification of data, which is the next step, I think, for a lot of countries. And now we're thinking of some risk-based mechanism to implement in state register that they can check some risk-based method, the declaration. Of course, we can think of a million different ways and risks to check. Someone mentioned about the BOs that own more than 5 companies. Of course, it's not legally prohibited. However, it is some kind of risks. However, in Armenian case, then journalists and citizens can check this data, because if we search, of course, it's still in Armenian. If we search the name of beneficial owner in state register, then you can see all the companies that this person owns. And it also can serve as a flag for investigative journalists or other people to do some investigation. And if something's wrong, then report it to the state register. And another one, we unified this to BO declaration. It's a FATF declaration that existed previously and was just open format declaration that were submitted and saved in state register, and also our new BO register. And currently it's a unified one register. And in case of this when it is checked in financial sector, and there is some differences between their checks and beneficial ownership information, that financial system can send a note to the state register that something is wrong, the data is wrong, and then it's another tool to do specific research and investigation on accuracy of data. And yeah, probably another suggestion, which it is not the case yet. Well, in some risky sectors, for example, very complicated legal schemes or ownership chains, which, for example, solely owned a list of super long list of companies, could be prevented legally before, for example, in mining sector, the permit or license to mine is granted to the company. So that could be one of the cases to prevent some tax evasion or shadow contracting, or so the possibilities are endless. And thank you also for your cooperation, helping us to solve some of the issues.
No, thank you. And that answers some of the questions people had about verification and checks. That's really, really useful to know. And verification and all the different ways that people can either automatically or manually check BO data is coming up with a lot of countries are raising this with us. So it's a very active area that people talk about. Thank you all so much. That's the end of our tech showcase today. I've got the presentations from all the speakers, so thanks to all of them for coming along and giving us their time. Ruben had to drop off a little bit earlier. I'll share those presentations around to everyone, and really appreciate everyone joining us today. Hopefully some of those resources will be useful to you, and yeah, thank you again to all the speakers for coming along and giving us their time. I'm just going to